Wait, pause for a second. Something quiet, something almost invisible has just shifted. If this message speaks to your heart, comment, "I receive this love," like the video, and subscribe for more. You're sitting on the edge of your couch, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, and you realize you've been holding your breath without knowing why. It isn't the kind of breathlessness that comes from a sprint or a panic attack. It's the gentle pulling of a thread that's been loose for months, now feeling like it's being nudged. Just a whisper of movement, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably present. That feeling isn't new. It's the same one you noticed the first time you realized she was no longer coming home for coffee at 6 p.m. The way the chairs stayed oddly empty, and the kitchen light stayed on a minute longer than it needed to. You told yourself it was timing, that you both had miles to walk before you could find the same road. But now, in this stillness, a quiet question surfaces. What if the road you thought you'd left behind never really ended? The distance that once seemed like a clean break now feels like a soft echo, a reverberation you can't ignore. The room feels a little larger, as if your thoughts have stretched the walls. You catch yourself replaying the last conversation. Her voice, the pause before she said, "I think we need space," the way the words landed on the table and fell flat. You remember the way she laughed when you tried to order pizza for two, and how you both pretended that the extra topping was a secret we'd share later. Those moments were tiny, almost invisible then, but they're resurfacing one by one like seconds caught in a tide that's now turning. Something about this moment feels different for them. You think, as if watching her from a distance. It's not the dramatic realization you imagined when you first felt loss. It's softer, more like a candle flickering back to life after a long night. You find yourself scrolling through old messages, not because you're desperate for an excuse to feel connected, but because a particular phrase stands out. A line where she wrote, "I can't explain why, but being with you feels like home." You don't remember feeling that deeply then, but now it resonates with a clarity you didn't have before. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. It's odd how an ordinary Tuesday can become the background for an inner storm. You're sipping tea that's gone cold, the flavor a little bitter, and yet the bitterness isn't in the drink. It's the lingering thought that maybe you walked away too quickly. Maybe I let go because I was scared to be vulnerable again, you wonder, and the question loops back on itself, each turn making the knot tighter. You begin to wonder whether the space she asked for was truly about distance, or if it was a pause she needed to hear the same song your heart was already playing. The memory of a rainy afternoon comes floating in. You recall the way the window pane turned into a watercolor, the scent of fresh earth outside, and how she pressed her hand against yours as if to say, "I'm here." You had barely noticed the pressure then. Now, under the weight of today's quiet, it feels like a landmark. Maybe she didn't leave a gap in your life. Perhaps she left a gentle invitation to notice what's still there, veiled by the noise of day-to-day. And this is where things quietly begin to shift. The realization doesn't scream. It simply sits in the space between two breaths. You aren't sure if it's an answer or just another question, but the feeling of regret that has been settled under your ribs begins to soften. It's not an apology you need to make. It's an acknowledgement that a part of you is still tuned to her frequency. Even if you've been listening on a different channel, there's an unspoken rhythm that seems to be aligning itself. Like the tide you once watched together on a beach at dawn. You notice the timing of your own thoughts, how they surface just as the sun hits a particular angle on the wall. It's not a grand sign written in the sky. It's a subtle feeling that something, perhaps the very universe you both once trusted, is nudging the pieces back together in a way that feels both inevitable and delicate. The notion of divine timing doesn't feel like a sermon here. It feels like a quiet, internal metronome you both might be hearing, just at different volumes. You pause the video you're watching, the one that always makes you laugh, and for a second your heart's tempo matches the background music. A soft song from a shared playlist, the one you both sang off-key to in the car, flickers on the screen. You think, if I reach out, will the note sound too sour? It's a question that dances on the edge of what feels safe. The thought of sending a simple text, "Hey, I thought of you when I heard this song," sits in your mind like a fragile glass, waiting to be placed on a table. It's not the kind of bold confession you imagined in the night before. It's a gentle, hopeful gesture, as modest as a leaf falling in autumn. This part, they didn't see coming. You consider what it would mean to let that vulnerability out. It isn't about fixing the past. It's about acknowledging that the space you felt was a void could actually be a room waiting for a new conversation. You remember the little things she used to say when she felt content. "I love the way the world seems to slow down when we are together." Those words now echo in the hallway of your mind, and you realize they weren't just about the moments you shared, but about the feeling of stillness you both could find when you truly listened. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. As the evening folds into night, you find yourself looking at the ceiling, replaying the same line of thought over and over. It's no longer a storm of what-ifs, but more like a soft tide that's receding just enough to reveal the sand beneath. Your inner voice, which for weeks had been wrapped in doubt, now whispers, maybe there's still a bridge to cross, even if it's built from quiet moments rather than grand gestures. And what they're beginning to realize now is something they can't ignore anymore. When the house finally quiets down and the glow from the street lamp paints soft shadows across the floorboards, that faint realization you felt earlier sharpens. It's not a flash of epiphany. It's more like a slow-moving tide that pulls a seashell toward the shore, one tiny grain of sand at a time. You find yourself sitting at the kitchen table again, this time with a mug that's gone cold, the steam having evaporated long before you noticed, still watching the same blank wall you've stared at for weeks. The distance that once seemed measured in miles now feels measured in moments you spend alone with a phone that's too quiet. You catch yourself thinking, why does the quiet feel louder than any argument we ever had? The question doesn't demand an answer. It simply sits there, a small stone that you keep turning over in your mind. The separation has become a space you can actually feel, not just a concept you talk about when you're with friends. It is the moment you pause the TV and notice that the sound of the rain outside isn't just background noise. It's a reminder of the night you both stood on the porch, coat sleeves pulled tight, and laughed at how the world seemed too big for two people to navigate alone. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. You remember the crumpled napkin you left on the counter that morning, the one with her hurried handwriting, "Buy milk, love." You had brushed past it, chalking it up to routine, but now it feels like a tiny breadcrumb she left behind, a whisper that says, "I was thinking of you, even when we weren't together." The memory surfaces without any fanfare. No cinematic sweep, just the soft rustle of paper as you fold it over again. Your thumb runs over the faint indent of her line, and in that gentle pressure you feel a pulse of regret, the kind that tightens a little part of your chest and releases it a heartbeat later. The regret isn't loud, it isn't a dramatic, "I should have never left" confession. It's more subtle, a soft ache that accompanies the sight of a familiar dish you used to make together. Yesterday, while scrolling through your phone, a recipe for lemon rosemary chicken popped up. You had cooked that with her once on a lazy Sunday, the scent of rosemary winding through the apartment as she hummed a tune you could never name. The scent is now a phantom you can almost smell, triggered by a screen, and it pulls you back to a moment where the world felt lighter simply because you were sharing it. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. You whisper to yourself, feeling the words settle like dust on an old bookshelf. You realize that the ordinary moments you once dismissed as background noise have become the foreground of your thoughts. The small things, her habit of putting a straw in her glass upside down, the way she always set the thermostat a degree lower than you preferred, are resurfacing as vivid reminders that the person you shared these quirks with is still an echo in your daily rhythm. You find your phone on the counter, screen dim, notification badge flashing a soft blue. A message from a group chat you both belong to, the one you left feeling too heavy, vibrates silently, its content a simple prayer. "May we all find the peace we're searching for." It's a line you've seen before, but now it feels like a small bridge extending across the chasm you built. Your thumb hovers over the reply box, and you sense the inner tug of a familiar hesitation. Part of you wants to type, "I hear you," but another part worries that sending anything now would feel forced. Like you're trying to fit a puzzle piece that doesn't quite belong. The inner confusion is a gentle storm. On one side, there's a whisper that says, "She still matters," and on the other, a louder voice that reminds you, you've moved on, you've started healing. The two sides don't clash. They merely sit across from each other at a small kitchen table, sipping the same tea, listening for the clink of porcelain. You can almost see them as two friends having a quiet conversation about the same photo album you once flipped through together. If you felt this shift too, let it settle in you. A soft, unexpected reminder arrives at 7 a.m. The scent of fresh coffee drifts in through the cracked window, and for a split second you hear the familiar scrape of the coffee scoop, her habit of tapping it 3 times before pouring. You sit on the edge of the couch, eyes closed, and the sound becomes a gentle metronome. In those moments you realize the space you thought you needed might actually have been a pause to listen for these tiny beats. The feeling isn't about destiny or grand design. It's about noticing the minute ways the world continues to whisper her name, even when you aren't actively searching. The next doorway in this quiet hallway opens when you decide to write down what you're feeling. You open a notebook, one you used to keep for travel ideas and random thoughts, and begin, not with a message to her, but with a line for yourself. I'm still hearing the music she hums when she wipes the counters. As the pen moves, the thoughts become clearer, the fog lifting a little more with each stroke. You don't write the text to her yet, but the act of putting words to the ache feels like turning a light on in a room that's been dim for too long. Your heart, which has been beating in a rhythm that feels both familiar and foreign, starts to settle into a new tempo. It's not the frantic rush of the first love, but a slower, steadier drum that suggests patience. Even the Bible verse you once bookmarked for comfort, Psalm 37:14, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart," now feels less like a platitude and more like a quiet reminder that waiting isn't about stagnation. It's about allowing the unseen to settle, like sediment in a calm lake. What they're beginning to understand now isn't just that they miss the person. It's that they miss the space that person occupied in their everyday world. The realization doesn't shout. It flickers, like a candle guttering in a draft, then steadies when you add a bit of wax. You notice that the same draft, that same feeling of incompleteness, has been present when you walk past the park where you first met her. When you see a couple holding hands on a bench and think, that could be us again. You think about reaching out, and the idea feels like a small stone you could toss into a pond, watching ripples spread outward. It's not reckless, it's cautious, measured. Your phone buzzes with a notification you didn't expect. A photo she posted earlier in the week, an old snapshot of a sunrise taken from the roof of the building you both used to climb when you were kids. The caption reads, "Morning light always finds a way." The photo is simple, but the timing feels symbolic, as if the universe has placed it there to catch your eye. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer. You can almost hear her voice in your head, not as an echo of words you once exchanged, but as a soft hum of certainty. Maybe this is the moment to let something small happen, to let the fear loosen its grip. You find yourself drafting a message, then deleting it, then drafting again. The words you finally settle on aren't an apology or a grand confession. They are a tender acknowledgement. "I saw your sunrise. It made me think of the mornings we used to share. Hope you're finding peace." As you hover over the send button, your hand trembles, not from anxiety, but from a gentle anticipation. It's as if you're standing on the edge of a familiar path you once walked together, looking back at the trail you left behind and noticing that the past and present are more intertwined than you'd thought. While the phone stays silent, you notice the world outside moving with an unhurried grace. A neighbor's dog pads across the lawn, a single leaf falling from an oak tree, the sky shifting from amber to violet. In that quiet, you sense a subtle sense of timing, not something shouted from the heavens, but a soft breathing of the day that tells you there's room for patience, for small actions to grow into something larger. If this resonates, let it settle in you. You close the notebook, fold the page, and tuck it into the pocket of a worn jacket. You wore the night you both watched the meteor shower together, when you both whispered wishes into the sky. The thought of that night bubbles up. You had both pointed at the same bright streak, and, without speaking, felt a shared longing for something beyond the ordinary. That memory carries a fragrance of pine and the faint rustle of his jacket zipper, and it reminds you that the connection you felt then hasn't vanished. It's simply been waiting for a quiet moment to reappear. Your inner dialogue now carries a new tone. Where once there was a dialogue of, should I reach out? There is now a quieter, steadier rhythm. If I do, I'll do it with honesty, not expectation. The gentle regret that had lingered, about unfinished conversations, about the unsent goodbyes, softens into a gentle gratitude for the chance to feel that tug again. It's as though your heart has moved from being a clenched fist to an open palm, ready to receive whatever may come. And the part of you that once measured everything in terms of loss now begins to view this as a chance for renewal. Not a revival of the past, but a new chapter that honors the past without being bound by it. In that sense, the divine timing you sense isn't an external scheduler, but the rhythm of your own breath aligning with a world that's still offering small signs. What happens next is subtle, but it matters more than you think. You take a deep breath, the air filling your lungs with a cool clarity. You look at the message draft once more, and without the weight of uncertainty pressing down, you press send. The phone vibrates, a gentle acknowledgement that something has moved. It's a tiny click, a simple act, but underneath it lies the accumulation of every quiet night, every remembered laugh, every small piece of paper left on a counter. You watch the tiny sent notification fade, and the feeling that follows isn't triumph. It's a soft relief, a sense that you've finally allowed the quiet part of you to speak. You lean back into the couch, letting the evening settle around you like a soft blanket, the rhythm of the house. Soft hum of the refrigerator, distant bark of a neighbor's dog, feels less like a soundtrack to loneliness, and more like a backdrop to something that's slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifting back towards wholeness. Imagine that the next step you'll consider isn't about demanding an answer, but about staying open to whatever comes, whether it's a reply, a smile, or simply a shared silence. That openness is the quiet transformation you've been moving toward. An acceptance that love can be both present and paused, that the soul can be rescued and also learn to walk on its own. And that's where the story moves forward. And what they're beginning to consider now is a path that's both familiar and entirely new. You might not notice the way the kettle sighs on the stove, the soft hiss that was always there but now feels like a tiny invitation. It's not a shout, it's a whisper that pulls your attention just enough to say, there's still space for small comforts. You find yourself reaching for that mug, feeling the warmth seep into your hands, and for a fleeting second the emptiness that settled after you sent that message hardens into something, a gentle, almost grateful pause. The room still smells of coffee, but the scent now carries a faint note of renewal, like after a rainstorm when the air feels fresh, clean and waiting. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. You settle onto the couch, the same one you used to share late-night talks with, and the cushions remember the shape of two people leaning in. The memory isn't a flash of drama. It's a soft outline that slowly comes into focus, a gentle line drawn with the faintest pencil. You recall the night you both stayed up till sunrise, chatting about movies you never saw, all the while the world outside stayed dark. That night you didn't say, "I love you," because the words felt too heavy, but you both laughed at the idea of it being a big thing. Now those laughs echo back at you, not as jokes, but as tiny proof that something tender still lingers in the corners of your mind. Something about this moment feels different for them. In the days since you pressed send, you've noticed a new rhythm to your mornings. The alarm rings, and instead of reaching for your phone first, you let the light linger, watching the way the curtains sway gently with the breeze. There's a small habit forming, walking to the kitchen, filling a glass of water, and just standing there for a heartbeat, feeling the coolness of the glass against your skin. It's not a grand ritual, just a tiny pause that gives you a moment to breathe. While you used to rush through those minutes, now you linger, as if the universe has given you permission to slow down just enough to hear the subtle music of your own thoughts. If this resonates, let it settle in you. The inner confusion that used to churn like a restless river is beginning to smooth into a placid pool. Earlier, every time your phone buzzed, you imagined her name flashing across the screen, even when the notification was about a grocery store sale. That anxiety had a name. What if I'm just chasing a phantom? You catch yourself asking, am I holding on to a version of her that no longer exists? The answer isn't a stark yes or no. It's more of a gentle acknowledgement that parts of her still occupy the same mental shelves where you keep your favorite books. The shelves are still there, but the books have been rearranged, some taken out, some placed back in new order. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. A subtle emotional trigger arrives when you hear a song you both loved on the radio while driving to work. The opening chords catch you off guard. You tap the steering wheel, a tiny involuntary motion, and a smile leaks onto your face. You remember the lyric she'd sing along to, her voice slipping into yours, each note a tiny promise that you were, in that moment, in sync. The song doesn't bring back the whole relationship, but it pulls a thread of connection that feels warm, like a finger tracing the edge of a scar, reminding you that healing can happen in small stitches, rather than dramatic surgery. The scar isn't gone, it's just less raw. You didn't expect this feeling to return. The realistic part of this journey is the quiet ascent, that you're allowing yourself to feel good without guilt. A few weeks ago, you would have scolded yourself for being selfish if you allowed a moment of peace. Now you sit with a cup of tea, eyes closed, and notice, not the absence of her, but the presence of your own breath. The breath is steady, a rhythmic reminder that your body has kept moving, keeping time without anyone else's input. That realization doesn't shout. It simply settles, like dust finding its place on a windowsill, unnoticed at first, but steady enough to change the view. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. You begin to notice more quiet reminders that seem to pop up out of nowhere. A handwritten note on your desk that says, "Take a breath," in a handwriting you don't recognize. A neighbor waves as you return home from a walk, saying, "How's it going?" The casual question feels like a tiny lifeline, a nod that you're still part of a larger story. You pause, feeling the subtle surge of gratitude that you didn't think you had the capacity to feel. This gratitude isn't directed toward her, though parts of her linger in that feeling. It's aimed at the very fact that you're still capable of noticing and appreciating the small gifts of everyday life. If you felt this shift too, let it settle in you. Your thoughts about reaching out have softened from a frantic need to fix something to a more measured curiosity. You no longer picture an urgent text demanding an answer. Instead, you imagine a gentle check-in that feels natural, like sharing a favorite meme or a short, "I saw this and thought of you." The inner voice that once screamed, "Don't wait," worrying that you'd be too late, now hums a softer tune. Perhaps the right timing is when the heart feels steady enough to send a word, not when it's trembling with desperation. The decision doesn't come from a place of pressure. It grows from a place of calm, a quiet confidence that you've done the inner work. Even if you can't see the full picture yet, stay with this. Because there's a deeper emotional layer here. You start to sense a soft, divine timing, not as a grand cosmic schedule, but as a rhythm of small events aligning just enough to nudge you forward. The phrase comes to you while you're reading a kitchen timer that's counting down, and the words linger. In his timing, all things become clear. It doesn't feel heavy or preachy. It's more like the whisper of wind through leaves, reminding you that some things need that extra breath before they bloom. You find solace in Psalm 34:18, reading it a few lines later. "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted." The verse doesn't dominate the narrative. It merely offers a quiet echo that resonates with the feeling that you're not alone in this moment of gentle repair. Gentle regret sits beside you, but it's no longer a storm. It's like watching rain on a window, there, present but not overwhelming. You think about the missed opportunities, the jokes that never got told, the goodnight texts that went unsent, yet you notice how those regrets have softened, taking on the color of old photographs, faded, but still beautiful in their own way. The regret isn't a punishment, it's a reminder that you cared deeply enough to feel it, and that caring still exists in a quieter, more mature form. Healing before clarity continues its quiet work. You notice that your stomach no longer tightens at the thought of her name. Instead, it feels like a gentle nudge, a soft flicker that says, "I still care, but I'm okay with being here now." The shift is not dramatic. It's the kind of change you barely notice until you look back and realize the tension has eased. You find yourself laughing at a joke you'd shared with her, and the laugh isn't tinged with melancholy, but with genuine amusement. A thought of reaching out now feels like offering a hand, rather than demanding a return. You picture a brief message. "Hey, I came across that old photo of the sunrise we took. It's bright today, hope you're seeing some light." It's simple, unburdened, and carries no hidden agenda. The thought lingers not as a frantic need, but as a possibility, a small door that might be opened when the time feels right. The idea isn't terrifying, it feels like a gentle invitation, a soft step onto a path you've already started to clear. What happens next is subtle. But it matters more than you think. You decide to sit with that thought, letting it sit on the edge of your mind like a stone you may pick up later. In the meantime, you watch the sunset from your balcony, the sky turning shades of amber and rose, and you feel a quiet awe that has nothing to do with anyone else. The world feels larger, but also more intimate, like an old friend you haven't spoken to in a while, yet whose presence you can still feel in the rustle of leaves. The feeling of being rescued isn't about someone else pulling you out. It's about you noticing that the rope you were holding onto was never just theirs. It was yours too. Even if it felt tangled, stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. Your inner dialogue now shifts from "what if she's still hurt?" to "what if both of us have grown in different ways, and that's okay?" The question isn't a plea for reconciliation. It's a quiet acceptance that growth can happen on parallel tracks. You remember a line she once said, half joking, "Maybe we're both just learning how to love the world on our own." That line now feels like a seed that's finally sprouted, reminding you that love isn't a single, static state. It's an evolving practice. The practice includes caring for yourself, honoring the quiet moments, and allowing space for whatever comes next, whether it's a message, a meeting, or a continued journey on separate paths. If you've felt this shift too, let it settle in you. You notice a new kind of clarity emerging. Not the crystal clear realization that everything will be perfect, but a softer, almost imperceptible understanding that you're on a path that's beginning to feel more right. The clarity doesn't arrive with fanfare. It shows up in the way you can smile at the thought of a shared memory without immediate pain. It's in the way your chest relaxes when you hear the sound of traffic outside, because you recognize that life continues and you are still part of it. The shift feels like a sunrise after a long night, slow, deliberate, but undeniably present. Your heart now holds both the memory of the love you once shared and a quiet hope that the present offers its own tenderness. You aren't chasing a finish line. You're walking a garden path that bends and weaves, each step revealing a different shade of light. The divine timing you sense is less about fate and more about rhythm, your breath matching the cadence of the day, the ticking of the clock, aligning with your internal sense of readiness. What they're beginning to realize now is something they can't ignore any longer.